Yeah, and so I think all of you are getting a feel if you watch these design school updates. It's like, did all of that happen in 2 weeks? And we're like, yeah, it did. And then 2 weeks later, you just repeat. It's like, how the hell are we moving at this speed? And the answer is because there's so many of us doing such great work in so many landscapes, and we're sharing with each other. So it's not, I mean, Penny and I are more busy, but it's not like we're doing it. It's that there's a lot. There's a lot. So yeah, I'm really excited about this morning where I made my third Facebook post about and my third LinkedIn post about the Regenerate Cascadia tour. And this is the one that actually took hold. So now I'm getting hundreds of people in different places reaching out and saying, hey, have you talked to this person in Eugene? And are you connected with that person in Port Townsend? And hey, what are you guys doing on Whidbey Island? And it's like, oh crap, that it's about to get busy. So so I'm sitting sort of dazzled by that. Like I lived in Seattle for 9 years and lived in Eugene for 5. And so about a third of my life has been in Cascadia. So I have a lot of connections there. And I was a sort of a network weaver on steroids for one of my years that I was there, with a little project I did called Seattle Innovators, which was basically me I had like beer or coffee, 5 meetings a day for 10 months. And then I would just gather the conversations into events. It's like, oh, after 2 weeks of this, let's organize an event with 70 people. And then just like taffy, folding and repeating and folding and repeating. So I know a lot of people because of the strange way I show up. So it's going to be fun. Poor Claire is going to have to deal with all of that. But we're not going to talk much about that today because there's so many other things going on in the design school. What I really want to do is as we always do in these updates, is give a big picture overview, strategic direction, kind of giving us a sense of the vision of where the school is and where it's going. We just learned yesterday that Mighty Networks has created this new insights feature for the hosts. So we were able to look at some of the statistics of the design school and look at some of the statistics of Earth Regenerators and get a feel for how these different platforms are working. And I'll share a little of that today, not about Earth Regenerators, but about the design school. And yeah, so I'm just going to jump in because I have a feeling the conversation will be better after the presentation. That's my sense. So I won't keep you all waiting. I'll just jump right into it. So here we go. I'm going to do that one. And I was going to move things around to be able to click the buttons. Okay, so this is our update for August 22nd. We do these every 2 weeks. I think this is the 5th one, something like that. And the big question that's been on my mind, and notice I put a lot of big words in this big question. How do we grow as a design school in the context of planetary partnerships and capacities? Because like there's so many other people doing similar kinds of things, and what we really need is coherence. And so we're now a month into talking about the idea of creating a bioregional Earth as a platform where we can regenerate entire continents as tapestries of landscapes. And this last month of having this way of framing it, going from planetary networks of bioregions to we actually want to create the Earth organized as bioregions, the bioregional Earth, has, let's just say it's opened a lot of interesting subtleties that you'll start to feel into a bit as we go. But the key thing is that in only a month, I'd say we've actually made progress in making this real, which is kind of interesting because I actually see this as a multi-year process. I don't see it as something that's going to be like completely changed in the span of 6 months. But anyway, as we're doing all that work, we're still in the midst of planetary collapse. And I found it really interesting to juxtapose these two things. On the right is the text that is on the Regenerate Cascadia website. So, it describes the Regenerate Cascadia tour and all the cool stuff that's coming. And then on the left is William Ripple, who's the original author of the Warning Letter to Humanity. And he's a professor at Western Oregon University, or Oregon State University in Corvallis. And he posted this back 2 days ago. Multiple fires in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia are now burning, and it's not safe to go outside in Oregon. And so it's weird for us to be planning to arrive into Oregon and Washington and British Columbia as the whole place is burning to the ground. And for those of you who don't know, back in 2018, my daughter was a year old and we were living in Eugene, Oregon, and we could not go outside for 2 entire months because the air quality index was so bad that children's lungs were at risk. So imagine Eugene, Oregon in the summer, which is like gorgeous. The climate in Western Oregon is amazing. And we couldn't take our daughter out for 8 whole weeks. So we like got the hell out of town. We moved to Costa Rica and we like left the United States. We're like, what the hell? So it's strange for me to be making this return in a way of like coming back. But I want to just really stress that there's no shortage of need for what we're doing and no shortage of paradox and irony to be held in the excitement of an activation tour when the real activation that's happening is wildfires burning across the whole Pacific Northwest and kind of all across Canada. So we're in the midst of major tipping points, abrupt climate change, all kinds of very serious and sobering things, which means that this Regenerate Cascadia tour really could be historic. It could have a planetary impact because of the significance of what's happening. So that in mind, one of the key things we're doing in the design school to figure out how to manage all this complexity is we're focusing a lot on the core governance of the school. Because, you know, the school started March 1st. It's only 6 months old. And we've been building toward having different ways of sharing leadership and holding the complexity together. So in the last 2 weeks, we've done a lot of work in creating governance around the Design School Fund and practicing within the Leadership Council. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that core governance is growing and spreading across the school. And then we're also holding, I would say we're attempting to hold narrative coherence around the weaving within and across landscapes, because there's a lot that's happening in the Great Lakes, in Cascadia, in the Colorado Basin, and in the Northern Andes. So in these major continental scale, like subcontinental scale regions, there's a lot of landscape weaving that's going on. So I'll touch on some of that today to show why we need distributed governance for the design school. And that all of this is building toward collaborative ecosystems at continental scales and at the scales of these land systems, like the Great Lakes or Cascadia. So there's a lot of work that's happening around creating impact funds, around creating funding partnerships, around creating networks of projects, of mapping projects and their ability to integrate with each other. And this is happening in a fractal or a nested way across all the scales of landscapes. And we're really moving toward creating collaborative ecosystems so that we can hold the complexity of all of this work together. And so in the heart of this, we have the Design School Leadership Council, which for those of you who weren't around when we first introduced the Leadership Council about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, the Leadership Council is comprised of 17 members of the design school, each of whom is a landscape organizer. So they work within a bioregion. So they might work in one of the headwaters of the Colorado Basin or in one of the landscapes of the Great Lakes, or they work as a landscape organizer between landscapes, like holding dialogues of the Great Lakes or coordinating the Colorado Basin. And so the Design School Leadership Council is people who have their finger on the pulse of what's going on the ground. And we feel like the design school's clarity and coherence only exists because we have leadership on the ground that is holding us to the coherence and the complexity of what's happening. And so the Leadership Council has been doing a few things in the last 2 weeks. One of them is that we set up a committee for the Design School Fund so that we can start governing the fund and allocating funding to projects within the community. That we're prototyping the governance of the Leadership Council itself. How do we invite new members to join? What would be our protocols for removing someone from the Leadership Council if they turn out to be troublesome? Governance protocols that we need to have in place. How do we manage conflicts within the Leadership Council so that it can function properly? So we've been working on creating some of that clarity in the last week or so. Also, just by having the Leadership Council exist, we're increasing coherence across the school because these 17 landscape organizers have a Telegram group as well as a space on Mighty Networks where we share information with each other, and it's helping us to just create more collective intelligence among us about what's going on, and have more immediate patterns of feedback and information sharing about what's happening across the landscapes, so that the design school can grow in a coherent way. And we're also shaping the field for strategic alliances, which is that we're building deeper relationships with each other. We're practicing governance within the Leadership Council and within the Design School Fund, so that we can practice governance with outside partners. Outside simply meaning those with whom the design school might work with in the future, so that we can move toward being a planetary scale collaboration. And so all of this is happening. It's been going on for about a month. And in the last 2 weeks, these are the 4 major areas that the Leadership Council is moving forward. And then specifically, we have the Design School Fund, which Anna Perpera has offered to play a facilitation role in setting up governance for the Design School Fund. And I just want to introduce a bit of clarity that we've needed within that process, which is that the Design School Fund, which is specific to design level members. So design level members of the school can participate in the Design School Fund, can apply for funding, can participate in its governance, and we're setting up those protocols for how they can do that. But this is distinct from creating collaborative funding ecosystems, which are way beyond the scope of the Design School Fund, which is about weaving of alliances and partnerships within landscapes and between landscapes in service to the regeneration of entire bioregions. So if we create a Great Lakes funding collaboration, that would be beyond the scope of the Design School Fund. Whereas if we help Roberta Hill in Maine to create a podcast to have greater coherence for bioregional work in the Acadian Northern Forest, that's something the Design School Fund might support. So specifically, the membership dues that all of you are paying, and that all of us are paying, in service to regenerative projects among members of the school, that the way that those membership dues are made to be in service is through the Design School Fund. The Design School Fund will bring membership dues into projects that design level members bring forth to support projects in the landscapes. And that in order to fund landscape leaders, we're going to need much broader partnerships that's way beyond the scope of our membership dues. Our membership dues are not bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. Right now, we have about $12,000 pooled together in the design school. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to practice with that money. But the landscape leaders need much larger collaborative funding ecosystems. And so we're basically doing this work at both levels at the same time. And this means that the school really is trying to regenerate actual landscapes by helping all of this to emerge. This is one of the stories I told when the design school was forming, is that this is a school you can go to learn how to regenerate actual landscapes. And here you can see that design school members can apply for funding to advance their projects within their landscapes, while we also work to fund the landscape leaders, which is why it was so great when Benji mentioned that Elizabeth just received a grant yesterday. We love seeing the landscape leaders in the landscapes funded and thriving. We think this is extremely important and a very high priority of the school. And so all of this is part of the learning ecosystem of the school itself. How do we fund small projects? How do we practice governance together? And how do we create funding ecosystems for entire landscapes? All of this is part of the school. And so within the Design School Fund, we had our first meeting. We have a committee with about 20 members. In order to be eligible to be a member of this committee, you'd need to be a design level member. So design level members get to participate in the governance of the fund. And we're running a living finance lab, which is that we're taking money that's in the Design School Fund. We've decided to start with $5,000. So we have $5,000 of membership dues that we already have that's in our budget. And we're going to practice governance of the Design School Fund. And this was a decision that we made in setting up the Design School Fund, and something we discussed in a meeting of the committee for the Design School Fund yesterday. And some of the things that are starting to come out about how the fund is going to work is that we want to distribute this money to multiple projects so that we can practice equitable sharing of resources, so we can practice managing tensions and conflicts, so we can manage sense making and collective intelligence. So we're exploring how people can bring projects to the Design School Fund, that we can convene the people who want to be funded, have them share their projects with each other, and then equitably distribute the money amongst each other in service to the priorities and the criteria of the design school as a whole. And so we're setting up governance to be able to do this. And so this means that we want the initial funding that's going to be distributed to a set of projects to build capacities within the school. Specifically, we want to tell the story of the school better. We want to grow the membership of the school. We want to practice governance of the fund. We want to set up protocols for how the fund works in terms of priorities, criteria, and processes, all of these that build capacities in the school. And then we want to do this with an initial pool of $5,000, which we already have and that we're about to allocate. Another thing that we named into being in our meeting yesterday is that we need to prioritize the weavers, the people who are social network weavers, who are systems transformation weavers, who are working within their communities to identify capacities, to build their potentials, and to weave them together, because the weavers historically have a very difficult time finding funding. And so we need to prototype ways to fund the social weavers within our landscapes. And so we want this initial design school funding to prioritize the weavers. And also we want to have the money that we allocate with this first $5,000, as well as money that's allocated in the future, to help organize the landscapes themselves. So we're talking about things like leadership summits with landscape leaders, things like media strategies for storytelling and gathering people. We're talking about ideas that are very concrete, that are very timely, and that are very practical, that will help build the school, build the landscapes, and practice governance and funding together all at the same time. And so this is a glimpse into the Design School Fund as an emerging collaboration that is in process, and we'll have more to share soon as we start to practice together. While all of this is happening, there's a lot that's happening in the landscapes. So for example, in the Colorado River Basin, with the leadership of Benji, but also with the leadership of many others, as Benji's sort of holding the space in the Containers for Dialogue, they're planning a leadership retreat in the headwaters where they're going to bring people from the Delta in Baja California, from the Gila River area in Arizona, and other parts of the landscape. They're organizing a leadership retreat for mid-September. They're starting to do fundraising for that leadership retreat. They're requesting funding from the Design School Fund, so there are lots of multi-directional linkages around that part of the work. They're also mapping out the stories of place in different parts of the basin, as well as for the basin as a whole. There are a lot of conversations with Regenesis Group about how to do this better, and learning about the stories of the Oak Creek area in Superior in the Copper Corridor, the stories of learning exchanges from the bottom of the basin to the top, and from the top to the bottom. This is a really beautiful, multifaceted conversation about how to raise funding, about how to change the paradigms of economic development, and also how to deepen local connections to place using story of place processes. So there's a lot more that's happening in that space. And Benji's been doing really good reporting of it within the Colorado River Basin hub of the design school. Also, they're weaving with a lot of just different Indigenous groups. And for any of you who work with Indigenous groups, you know that this is messy, complicated, delicate, continually changing. It touches a lot of trauma and wounds, but there are some collaborations happening within the Colorado Basin, as well as with people in other Indigenous cultures in different parts of the world. Sure. A few of the groups here that are floating in the space of this complex mess, which is a touch and go process, as any of you who work with Indigenous groups will know. But they are actively building the story of place process around how to form relationships with different Indigenous groups where there are pathways to do so. So that's an element of this conversation. Also, they're helping to birth bioregional learning strategies, which are being replicated or at least being observed to learn from in Cascadia and the Great Lakes. So there are a lot of conversations about creating multiple bioregional learning centers, about how to hold stories of place in a nested way across different parts of the landscape, and so on, that are happening in the Colorado Basin. And they're also exploring how to sustain and template knowledge exchanges with other regions. So I'd say there's a lot of activity in the Colorado Basin that is spreading across the other landscapes of the design school. And that this is a place with a lot of activity that's been going on, especially since Benji arrived in Paonia. Was it just 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago? Sort of crazy how much has happened in the last few weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. If people could mute themselves, that would help, so we don't have background noise. Also, we're preparing for a huge Regenerate Cascadia activation tour. This is a map that Brandon put together for their info sessions to organize the organizers. I'd like you to look at this map and think about how exhausted Penny and I are going to be. Because basically, this is about 5 weeks of immersion. This is our major rock tour of Cascadia, starting September 28th and ending November 5th. And we're going to be completely exhausted, but we're going to be moving all over the western part of the Cascadia bioregion. There is a huge amount of organizing starting to happen on the ground. There's been about 6 months of preparation to make this happen. Get ready for the tsunami because it is coming. The Regenerate Cascadia tour is going to be freaking huge. And we can already feel it with the major organizing that's happening in the Columbia River Gorge, in Portland, in Port Townsend, on Vancouver Island. We've just started nudging the sleeping giant in Eugene, Seattle, Vancouver. It's going to be a lot. And what we're really hoping to prototype from this is how community organizing, infrastructure building, and digital ecosystems can work together for the incredible complexity and scale of this work. So Regenerate Cascadia, which starts in about 6 weeks. The on-the-ground work begins on September 28th when Penny and I arrive into Seattle. But this map maybe gives you a feel for the incredible range. You know, just left to right on this map, you're looking at about 500 miles of horizontal distance. So the complexity involved is just astonishing. So get ready for it. It's going to be huge. And there's a lot of work that's happening in the background. In the meantime, we're navigating the delicate threads of how to build a planetary network. So we've been talking with the original creator of Hilo and the Edge Prize, a guy named Edward West, about running Edge Prizes in Cascadia and in the Colorado Basin as a way of identifying funders who would bring in pools of money where the money would allow organizing and weaving of projects to happen on the ground. The first Edge Prize just was completed about 3 months ago, and Regenerate Cascadia was one of the recipients of Edge Prize money. Claire and Brandon were participants in the process, as were some others here in the design school. We're also talking with groups like the Regenerative Communities Network, R3.0, the Gaia Commons, the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and more. And what we're finding is in every case, there are subtleties, there are histories, there are traumas, there are alliances, there are political agendas, and we're navigating the delicate threads of how to build a planetary network. And so as the work on the ground is holding coherence and bringing complexity, we're finding that most of these groups are not organized on the ground, and that we're the most organized on the ground of all of them, but they bring a lot of really powerful organizing capacities. So we're navigating how to do this together. And the Gaia Union, the Gaia Commons, is organizing in a more advanced way in Latin America. So we're exploring how to partner with them to bring sustained long-term funding to Barichara, as well as to bring bilingual collaborations between North, Central, and South America. Stay tuned on that front. But there's just a lot happening in the background for building this planetary network. And as all of this is happening, the design school itself is growing. So I just wanted you to see this. This is from January to the present, looking at the number of active members per month. and looking at the total number of members. And what you'll notice is you can ignore the blip of 39 people in January. That's because the platform used to be bioregional activators and we closed it, basically kicked everyone out and invited them back in to use the platform. It was just a little data glitch of having a number of people there. That basically on March 1st, we opened the platform, people started joining. The key thing I want you to notice is that between May and June, we started to grow the members because in June is when we created the community level membership. And so we have more and more community level members joining. The other thing I want you to notice is that while the total number of members is about 135 as of today, that the number of active members, which is people who show up and click on something or comment on something, is 110, which means almost everyone in the design school is showing up. Do you know how often this happens on a digital platform? That almost everyone on the digital platform shows up? It's unprecedented. So the fact that the numbers are relatively small for the ambition of the work is not really the point. The point is we have a very coherent, very highly engaged collection of people, and that we're starting to grow. And between June and now, we've doubled in size from about 70 members to 135. And that as we grow, we're continually evolving how we work together as a community. And that means that we need help. So Penny has been asking for help. Yesterday, she posted this into the member lounge, who wants to join a welcome team, because Penny was the person tending to the community, speaking with everyone, welcoming them when they show up, creating the orientation materials. And Penny could do this when it was 60 members. But now that it's 135 and growing, it's getting really hard for Penny to do all of that. And we love Penny, and Penny's really good at it, but she can't do it on her own. So she's invited people to join a welcome team. A few of you have already said yes. If you would like to join her, go to the member lounge, find this post and get involved, or just reach out to Penny directly. And also in the Culture and Connection Center, more activities are starting to bubble up, including that yesterday, Anna posted this invitation into evolving our pro-social culture, which people are starting to join, where we're going to be basically teaching people pro-social and designing pro-social contexts within the school. So if you want to learn and practice, go to this post under school happenings and let Anna or Penny know, or just message them directly. And also, some of you will know that Penny created a space called Inner Space, and the Inner Space held an activity called Listening Circle. And this happened, what was it, yesterday in the morning? And she could speak more about it during the discussion. But this Listening Circle was like a campfire on steroids. They created a really intimate, vulnerable, safe space and explored deep learning processes, deep healing processes. And this Listening Circle is like a set of social technologies for building deep coherence within ourselves and building relationships with each other for the devotional work of Earth regeneration. And so we're basically adding more and more spaces where the culture and the community can come together so that as the community grows larger, we can maintain and deepen our coherence. So all of this is to say that we're working at multiple levels simultaneously. All of this is moving forward at the same time. And what our real focus here in all of this is looking to the new horizon of humanity as the planetary systems and globalized human economic systems collapse around us. And we're trying to build as much coherence as we can. And so that's my update for the design school. And I hope you can see that we don't shy away from complexity. We're not afraid to work across multiple levels simultaneously. And that the coherence of this work is only possible because there are landscape teams doing work on the ground. So, so I'm sure that this opens up lots of questions, lots of unanswered or unexplored topics, but I wanted to paint a picture of what is emerging, that the design school is growing out to a planetary level of alliances. It's practicing, it's got training wheels to practice distributed governance, and we're practicing distributing money and creating financial flows while all of this work is happening across all of these landscapes And yeah, that's it. So I'd love to open it up to discussion, to questions, to further sharing from the different landscapes about all that is happening. As you can see, I'm tiptoeing across the complexity because there's actually about 1,000 times more than I could name. But I think you can feel the richness of it. So I'd love to open it up to discussion. Are there any questions, or are there any of the topics I touched on where someone would like to share more, like share more about the inner space, or about Colorado Basin, or about Regenerate Cascadia, or about the Design School Fund, or we can actually bring out more clarity? So I'll stop talking now. Safia, please. Welcome.
Hey. Amazing. So good to hear everything. I have a question about the Regenerate Cascadia and the tour you're doing. Like what is kind of the best way to support that as a community level member who's in a few of those communities? If there's any touch points that would be the best places to lean in to offer presence and promotional support or whatever is needed in those ways.
I don't know if Brandon or Claire would like to answer that one. Claire, do you want to go first? Maybe Claire and then Brandon. Jump on in.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, great, thanks. And it's so great to see you here, Sophia. Sophia. Yeah, we're going to be having an info session once a week, and you can get to it through the Regenerate Cascadia website. So it'll be Thursday nights from 6 until 7, and then we've got a camp followed by a campfire, which is much more of a chance for people to kind of connect and have conversation about what's coming up. And there's also, through the Regenerate Cascadia site, once you get there, you can also join the Telegram group. So I can either connect you, I don't know if you are in Telegram, but that's a really good way of kind of honing in at the different levels so that you're connecting with people that are organizing in those areas. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Brandon. And Brandon has just been doing like an incredible job with the back end of putting a bunch of especially the website together and sort of trying to make it so that it's an easy, what we've called front door approach. So you go through the front door and then you can kind of start navigating your way through.
Brandon, is there more you wanted to share?
I think I think that's great. And where are you located, by the way?
I'm currently on Salt Spring. I grew up here, so I'm really embedded in the community, and I'm moving to Victoria in a month. So I have some good ties there and moving for school. So yeah, a little bit of
That's
both.
wonderful. Okay. Yeah, that's really great. And I think I saw earlier, we have a few other people in the islands up there, and then Ben Cadell is definitely the person to connect with, I think, for that. But everything is I'd just say is kind of in a rough draft state, and we're really trying to lock in our organizing teams and all of our back ends probably by September 1st, so that people can then kind of shift and locate. And so just be prepared that we're working on everything. We're working on the paperwork, the invitations, the website. I just had a meeting this morning with a team of people who's offered and is volunteering their time to help us with the website, and that's really amazing. So we'll probably have like an updated form, and the whole idea is that we'll have a public facing website which will talk about Regenerate Cascadia, but also then a back end space that'll have all the organizer tools, and then have it connected in for both the activation tour with the schedule, the bioregional summit, so that people can sign up, offer to host presentations, get involved that way. And then the third element is this movement map. So we're hooking in with Kumu to build kind of a social movement map that visualizes our connections, so we can see who's at the table, who's not at the table, and really working to kind of grow this network of trust. So it's a lot of work, but I actually think we're making good headway. So our main organizing is done on Telegram. The info sessions are definitely the best place to drop in Thursday night, 6 p.m. And then that campfire gets to be a little bit more of an open space at 7, where organizers can meet each week, meet each other, and dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it's a big, huge moving flow. Anyone else have questions or comments or elaborations to share? We're all just pensive today.
Maybe I'll just add this unless someone has other things to add, but just to say, one of the things that I've really noticed is there's events going on in my local community, and by like really making sure that I'm physically there, it means that I get to meet people, having conversations with people that are actually engaged in those things in the community. And it's like that is a huge part of like actually trust building, because I know I'm showing up there, but I am pretty present in other things, just that I'm really amping that up right now. But it's incredible how much that actually then connects so many other people into the stuff that's already there. So it's just like really maximizing. I just wanted to say that that feels like a really important thing, especially when there's a whole all the scaffolding starting to be in place to catch those conversations and allow them to go somewhere.
Yeah, thank you for that, Claire. And just one thing I've started naming to people is the purpose of the activation tours is to serve the landscapes. And so it's not like Joe is going to sell copies of his book and it's not serving me, right? We come in service to the landscapes. So really helping people to see that this is a way of creating coherent stories that help them to come together, because there's so much fragmentation. And so, so it's really a big deal. So Elizabeth is standing next to a beautiful picture and Brad has his hand up. So maybe go to Brad, and then Elizabeth, I'm going to ask you to share that after Brad goes, if that's okay. Brad, come on in. And Haroon, hi, Haroon, how are you?
Say hi to Joe.
No pressure, it's all good.
No. Oh yeah, no, don't start. He'll take over the meeting.
Brad, jump on in.
I was just reflecting, Joe, like the overlay between the Regenerate Colorado River Basin activation tour and what I saw a social media post. I followed up with you. I got like somebody's email. They didn't quite respond. And think about what that's unleashed, right? Like it's totally changed my life, right? Benji's over here now. So I'm just like trying to imagine like what the Cascadia tour is going to be like. Like that's just very exciting. Yeah, and I'm also feeling like even though it feels like it's moving slow here for me, it's maybe like the personal work that I need to do, and also maybe the work that the design school needs to do before like really a lot of people coming in. So I really resonate with that, like building coherence and back to like the last thing, like how do I sell Joe Brewer? Where's the 5-minute clip that I can hook people with the thing? And I still, we don't quite have that. Maybe we don't ever need that, but just putting that out there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brad. I want to just name that we changed Benji's life by sending him to the Headwaters. So it's multi-directional. Elizabeth, would you like to share your drawing there? I can even like put you up here to spotlight you so everyone can see it. What did you do there?
Yeah, sure. Well, I didn't do this. Well, I did a little bit of it, but this is collaborative work. So having Benji in town is I'm not sure how to describe it, like a firecracker. He's just like no, not a firecracker, like a water drop, nourishing and bringing goodness and life and health wherever he goes. And we're having meetings, I don't know, is it once a day, Benji, or something like that? It's a lot. And we're starting back with campfires again. So we were having like 2 or 3 campfires a week. We had a little break while family came, and then we're back to having campfires again. And we have the campfires in in somewhere in nature. So the last time it was down by the river park, and we all went for a swim afterwards. But what we're finding is there's a core group of us here who invite different people every week, and we get to hear their story of place, and we share our story of place too. And it's quite fascinating because even amongst ourselves, we haven't heard all of each other's story of place. And then Benji is also meeting one-on-one with people here. So there's a core group of what we're calling devotees, you know, people who are really devoted to this work. And we're starting to, well, the other thing that's happening is we're getting this land for the design school, not necessarily brick and mortar design school, but we're all working pretty hard on the funding to get this land for the design school, like a place. And so there's a lot of imaginative work going into that. Like imagining us already on the land with our bus. Suddenly this picture of the bus arrived at Marissa's yesterday. Dun 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 dun. So the idea of having a bus for the Bioregional Learning Center, just like it accidentally on purpose landed in our laps yesterday, this picture of a bus, and we've had this idea of a bus for a while, and to park it at the design school. But then we were thinking, you know what park it at the Bioregional Learning Center. But then we were thinking, what's a Bioregional Learning Center between us? And so that's what this is for. We're coming to the why of having a Bioregional Learning Center specifically in Paonia, to care for the interrelated systems of the whole earth. Being responsible, we're almost at the headwaters here, so taking responsibility for the headwaters. So that's the headwater of the Colorado, and making sure that the water from the top of the Colorado goes down to the bottom of the Colorado. Wisdom of elders, this regenerating the Colorado River. This is what we gathered yesterday when the devoted leaders kind of convened. And what we thought we might do is take this into community, because we've already done the project and we came up with a lot of stuff, and we only did this in about half an hour. Think how much others can contribute to this. And so that's all around the Bioregional Learning Center. And then I have a project here, and Marta Sanchez started this, but it's really to color in the Colorado River with lots of beautiful vegetation. And, you know, it starts way up here, but we're down in Paonia. We're up in Paonia in the mountains, and Chris is in Superior. And I'm going to basically just color this whole thing in with people, with kids, with whomever, and read the story again of Leopold and how he described the vegetation in Mexicali as it was when a few hundred years ago. So we're gonna regenerate this Colorado River through visioning and through our imaginations and through some incredible hard work here. But in the meantime, we have our imaginations and crayons. So that's what that's all about.
Well, I'll just tell you right now that when I bring my daughter, it's going to be crayons, or it's going to be gel markers, or it's going to be pencils. But yeah, she will definitely be like drawing on that piece of paper with you. Gosh, that's so inspiring. It's so beautiful. Benji, come on in.
Yeah, I don't want to say too much, Elizabeth. That was beautiful. Thank you. I was like beaming the whole time. But you know, I've been so won over by the idea of community art for so long. in big thanks to Claire. The role that it serves in all of this is just like oftentimes so hard to define and so hard to predict. But yesterday was just such a fun example to just see this huge opening. It's like, oh my God, there's so few boundaries in this all of a sudden. And we can really like play and maneuver and shake and do whatever we need to do to make sense of this. And yeah, more of that, please. And let's really like lift that up because that was fun, and I think it just creates such a wide open invitation to so many people. So that's all I want to say. Elizabeth did a great job. I don't want to flood the update for the Colorado River Basin. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks for that, Benji. Just want to add, for those of you who don't know, that our beloved Eduardo Esparza is flying to the Hamptons today, because tomorrow, if things go well, he's going to try and raise $30 million. And so that they can create the engine for the impact fund. And so we'll learn soon how that goes. But just to name it, like, none of us is faking this. None of us is going halfway. Like, there are so many people going all out. And just like Elizabeth saying, we're going to just draw whatever we want the Colorado River to be on this piece of paper. Eduardo's like, I'm going to go and try and get whatever money's needed. It's like, we're basically kids of different ages doing our part. And I just naming that's really important, because it's really key that we figure out how this happens in the real world. Like, basically we just don't ever leave the real world as we're doing it. And at the same time, we have the imagination of my 6-year-old daughter and a piece of paper with crayons. Benji, you wanted to add something in there?
I just promised Eduardo that I would tell as many people as I possibly can between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. tomorrow Eastern time is when it's happening. And so if you could just send good energy towards the Hamptons of all places, please do so. We're going to try to get so many people in Paonia who are thinking about him at that time that the whole landscape is just reverberating. So that's the goal. 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern.
Heck yeah. So are there any other questions or comments about the update, or just about what's going on with the school in general? Because it's all sort of a nice mix. Chad. By the way, hi, Chad.
Hi. Good to see everybody. And this is so inspiring, seeing all the momentum building, not just one place, but across multiple places. A question that I have is about the nature of the community visits and the process that's needed to make that happen. So over 20 stops in Cascadia is amazing, and lots of visits in the Toronto tour. I imagine similar pieces are being assembled in Colorado. So yeah, what's there to say about like what sort of capacities are needed or processes just to connect with what range of community groups and sites and how that's unfolded?
Yeah, I'll give a little comment to that, and then others can jump in. That I think the key here is to think of the activation as being like germinating a seed that is then going to grow across its whole lifetime. So there's this intense energy that happens during the time of the activation tour, and it creates a really interesting problem, problem in quotes, for the organizers, which is now they have to manage expectations and all of the energy and all of the engagement, because that's happened everywhere. And we expect that to just keep happening. It's like we're in a tinderbox of like, if you can ignite a spark of meaning in people's lives, it will create a wildfire of meaning. And so holding that is a really big deal. And one of the things it does is it creates a kind of crushing sense of responsibility on the organizers. Like, the organizers who invited us at first were like, wow, Joe's going to come give talks. We don't have to pay for it. Like, this isn't free. No, you're not paying for it, but it's not free. You're not responsible for it. And so there's a way in which it's really important to recognize that. Because what's happening, and we're learning this, I think our best learning is parallel between the Greater Toronto Area and the Colorado Basin, which is that in both places there has been sustained capacity to carry the process forward. For the Colorado Basin, it was because Benji was able to relocate into it and to help hold it in that way. And in the GTB, it's because of Brian and Susan. You know, whereas like if you look at the rest of the Great Lakes as the Great Lakes, Anna's done a great job of holding it, but it doesn't have the coherence of the Colorado Basin yet. It's also a really complex environment. So I think we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot about how to do this. And we're bringing that to the Cascadia tour of how to have talks together with workshops, not just talks. How to have a sequencing so the organizers know what to expect. Brandon's putting a lot of thought into a 1.5 week long summit after the activation tour to just give a place for things to land, to figure out next steps, because we know this is going to open up a huge amount of things. So I won't say more than that now, because I see that Brandon and Claire both have things to add on this. But I think the real key is the organizing capacity to continue after an activation tour and to have a lot of thought going in beforehand is like, without that, you're just going to create a tsunami that will just splash and dissipate. And so, and then it's a huge lost opportunity. So Brandon, on to you.
Well, I'll actually let Claire, would you like to go ahead first, and then I'll follow you up?
Okay, sure. Yeah, no, I just felt like I wanted to add on to that, just to say, you know, just sometimes you just need that, like it is a catalyst, but the conversations that have just come out of like just being able to materialize, and then having like really, we've been needing to connect this network forever. These people have been doing this work for a long time. They just haven't been connected. And it's just, they are now, even at this stage, starting to be connected, which means that even without us, those would continue, but they really, it does require more coordinating to keep that momentum going, and with a coherence that is just, I mean, it's just so exciting to bring the capacities of the design school into that process. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I like, it's so exciting to see these different layers of conversation. Some of them will like actually be, you'll see them during the tour, but they've already got their own momentum that's starting to come together. So Brandon.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting point. So when Claire and I kind of first started talking about the Regenerate Cascadia tour, a really big focus is we were looking at events like the Edge Prize that we were in at that time, and then also the Regenerative Communities Global Summit that they had held last year. And both of these were really amazing, like one-time events, and the energy while we were in those events was really wonderful. But it also became clear that a lot of times these are organized with really small teams, really like, you know, with fast turnaround where like, you know, it's really like everything needs to get done. And there's not a lot of scaffolding built in for what comes before and what comes after. And so Claire and I really wanted to focus on making sure that as we invited Joe in and the Design School for Regenerating Earth, that we were scaffolding the pre-activation and the post-activation, and really focusing on using the time at these one-time events at the summit to co-create how we're connecting that back into the work that we're doing on a daily basis. And hopefully kind of co-create the pathways together that we're visualizing all that and removing ourselves as bottlenecks so that we can really be empowering that grassroots social organizing where people can be connecting together. And I think that's really important. So for the activation tour itself, it's funny, I think in terms of like the bus and traveling in a bus, we were also really inspired by Bread and Puppets, which is a really cool, fun event. But we hosted their recent, it's literally a circus, right? With amazing puppets and social activism and community art. But you know, they travel around the country doing these tours and stops, and so using that as a little bit of an inspiration for how we were modeling our own tour was really important. And then that idea of the summit as being a capstone to that bioregional activation tour, where we're only in these communities for 1 or 2 days, and as we're going through them, we're also activating a lot of people who want to be involved at places that we're not even stopping. I mean, Cascadia is a huge place. There's all these things, and if they're close enough to get to a you know, a local activation, then that's really wonderful, a local event. But for people who can't make it, and also just because we're working with like dozens of really amazing people, where even if no one else was involved, just giving them a platform and space would be amazing. And so that's the point of the summit, is just to literally be like, look at all the amazing work. And it can be a space where we also are talking about what's not working, but it is a space where it's almost like a festival of what works, where we can be sharing lessons. And Victoria might have amazing things going on. Port Townsend might have amazing things going on, and people in Portland might never have heard of it, and they might be doing the same type of work or similar work. So how do we better connect those together? And so there's going to also be a lot of focus on that we haven't even touched on yet, which is going to be also the debriefing part, the harvesting or gleaning of information and knowledge, of really putting these together as proceedings and videos and podcasting and live streaming, so that we can capture these lessons learned and create that greater coherence. So creating the shared vision and then figuring out who's at the table to actually really start these talks of bioregional governance, regenerative financing, ecosystems, impact funds. How is that being allocated? How do we have transparency in that process, and trust with each other, as we're creating these like watershed hubs and interconnective tissues that can support all of this work and connect it to the landscape project. So that's kind of a lot of our different thinking that went into that.
Yeah, and Chad, I would add just coming back to what maybe some of your personal motivation of like, I'm in Michigan and I'm starting to think about organizing and chatting with some people, is that what I think is going to be really powerful is to scaffold upon what we've already done, which is to scaffold upon what we've done twice now, and there'll soon be a third visit to the greater Takaranto bioregion, to scaffold upon what we're building in relationships, although it's quieter at the moment, with the Cuyahoga River and with Cleveland, because there are just amazing people there. And what we're scaffolding upon with the Genesee River Finger Lakes area that Jonathan and Victoria are leading, like if we can help mobilize resources for the Bioregional Learning Center in the Finger Lakes, together with mobilizing some of the amazing philanthropic capacities of Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, these places that you know are like, it's like incredible what's there. And then I can't help think about what comes out of the Rust Belt cities. I mean, both my parents are from St. Louis. I know what a Rust Belt city really is. These are the places that have already gone through economic collapse. And so to envision the new economy is not hard, because they've been living it for decades already. So to really galvanize that as a resource, sort of like how the post-colonialism of places like Colombia, the violence of Colombia is why they're the world's best peace builders, that there's something about the post-collapse economies or some of the best economy builders. And I know Michigan's a beautiful irony in that way. So I want to just hold that awareness that I think that the signature of these places will be different, but the capacity to build upon them is going to be how the story of place process. Like if you just learn more from what Elizabeth was saying, they keep having campfires in Paonia, and everyone's story of place is a little different. And just by having small gatherings with half a dozen people and telling their stories, they're transforming their communities already in some sense, or at least the potential for what they might do together. So for that to lead to a bioregional activation, and then to build from, like maybe from the GTB, we're able to bring some funding for a Great Lakes team, so that as you're doing your work in Michigan, you can work with that already funded Great Lakes team, which didn't exist when we were there in February. So the scaffolding is a really big deal. And so, and we don't know where it's going to come from. Like it might turn out that the impact fund for Cascadia comes from Michigan. Who the hell knows, right? We don't know where it's going to come from. But if the story is right, I think it's going to make a big difference. So I would say we're learning a lot about how these activation tours work, and we're building more nuance into how we think about them. And I think that's the main project of the design school as curriculum. Say, what is the curriculum of the design school? It's how do we go from pre-activation to bioregional regeneration with learning exchanges, which is actually regional economic development. So it's hugely complex. I've stimulated something in Benji, so come on in.
I just wanted to Yeah, stimulated by the idea of scaffolding. I've got an anecdote just this morning that I can share that can bring, I think, a little bit more understanding of possibility, understanding of the scaffolding that these bioregional activations provide in communities. This, of course, is not exactly related to pre-activation processes, but Joe and Penny moved through Paonia a couple times in the last 6-8 months, and a lot of people attended those meetings. And trust building in these small towns, just in general in community organizing, trust building is so big, coherence is so big, being a part of the stories, shared story is so big. And I can't tell you how many one-on-ones I've had with people who I didn't actually even remember from attending public talks, but they said that they had attended and they were inspired, and it just allowed us to start the conversation at such a high level. There was just such deep resonance right off the bat. And there's magic in that. I had a conversation with somebody this morning that, there's some interesting local tension and politics involved with the organization they're involved in, and other people we're working with. And I just said, so were you at the talk? I was the guy clicking the button to move the slides forward. She was like, okay. And then we were friends, like right off the bat. So there's so much value in this. So I just wanted to share that little story.
Yeah, I just want to ask Penny if there's anything you wanted to share. You've been listening. No pressure.
No, my brain not
Okay.
not right now.
Just wanted to invite it. Well, what I think is so important about these design school updates is that it's for me to try and figure out how to tell a story of what's happened in the last 2 weeks, which is, by the way, pretty challenging. It's like there's so much going on. And what I hope it does is it lets you go back and you can actually see these little time capsules of like, wow, in mid-June they were doing what? And here we are in September and we're doing what? And I think documenting this as a process is actually a really big deal. And also, I hope you can see the direction more and more clearly of where we're going, which is the direction we're going is planetary platform with decentralized alliance networks, with collaborative funding ecosystems, with lots and lots and lots of on-the-ground experimentation. And that we want this ecosystem to be resilient enough it survives the rest of the collapse. Because, we're not trying to stop the unsustainable system from collapsing. That would just make things worse. We're trying to keep humans and a couple million of species from going extinct during the rest of it. And so just to recognize that this is really advanced spiritual and healing or psychological or grief processing work, such an important part of this. And that one of the things that's going to be really interesting in the next few months, especially with Regenerate Cascadia as an event or an event structure for a series of events, is what happens when we grow the number of people involved? What happens if there are 1,000 members of the design school? Will we be as coherent or will we be a mess? That's a good question. And so, we don't know. And what happens if we mobilize hundreds of millions of dollars into these landscapes? How will that attract the narcissists and the psychopaths to us who suddenly see us as important? What happens when we're no longer flying below the radar? Right now, we're almost entirely invisible. No one knows what we're doing. Maybe a couple thousand people are paying attention at all out of 8 billion people. What happens if we become famous? I actually don't want to be famous. So these are really big questions. So Benji just said integrity is the keystone, which I think is absolutely right. And I also have said that to Benji so many times. It's like we both say it to each other. Claire, I see your hands up. Is there something you wanted to add in?
Well, one thing I just wanted to bring in was just, I know I've said it here before, but I just think it's worth saying again is one of the things that has come up when we've spoken to different groups in the community about inviting them in is they're dealing, often the people they're trying to navigate and the issues they're dealing with are pretty polarized. And one of the things about the container of the land helping to organize the people is that it's pretty, it's non-polarized. It's like, that is what it is. And it creates this, nonpartisan container for dealing with those issues. And it's really powerful. So I just wanted to kind of really drop that in again, just to say, I think that the times that we're in, those are like huge issues that are intractable. And this has been kind of like this third way that people see. So just wanted to bring that in again.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll add that earlier in the year, or no, it was last year in November, it was way back then, Penny and I were in Boulder in Colorado, and we went to the home of Benjamin Life, and his brother Christopher was working with the independent political parties of the United States. Really brilliant guy, and they're a brilliant family. And one of the really interesting insights that Christopher gave us, which is Benjamin's brother, is that there are more people who are members of independent parties than there are Democratic and Republican Party, because so few people vote because the system is so broken. And the reason that the two-party system wins is because no one shows up, and because the system is so structurally compromised that it will never work. It is completely broken. But when we started talking about introducing bioregionalism to independent political parties, their main issue, like you talk to someone who's at the top of the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, which, by the way, you get crazies in these parties. So I'm not saying like everyone's awesome. You get crazy people in these parties. The main issue is the leadership has too many crazies in their own parties. So now let me translate that. People are so traumatized that they cannot participate in real politics. And so if people can connect to land locally and show them that they can organize around their watersheds or other things that seemed impossible, that actually these independent political movements will coalesce around land. And I see this where I'm from in Missouri, where you get like super racist redneck hicks who don't actually have any problem working with a black guy. They just never met one. I mean, it's really interesting. My sister's a huge Trump supporter. She's also a good person. So it's complicated. But what's interesting is when you talk about caring for the land, it just comes in completely lateral to that. It comes in completely from the side. It opens up a really different conversation. So I'm thinking more of the brokenness of the US political system, although Canada's political system isn't that much less broken. It's a mess. The nation states are going out. They're going away. I mean, they're just so broken, they're going away. So it's really interesting to see the power of community currencies, of circular economy models, of solidarity networks, of conservation groups, community reforestation projects, ... There's a lot of it. But yeah, there's huge untapped power in organizing around something that actually works. So, and I see, whoa, Grace is ready to show. Oh, I'm looking forward to what Grace says now. Come on in. Hi, Grace.
I don't know if I've shared that here, but like every other country in the world, Slovenia is polarized. But about 2 years ago, the government decided, and so all the parties are split half and half, and like when elections come, you get this booklet like this thick of like all the different candidates, and it's just so ridiculous. But about 2 years ago, there was a vote. Well, actually, the government passed a law that buildings would be able to be built closer to the water. So right now, the way it is here is that 50 to 100 meters from any waterway is public land. Even if you've already got a place there, it's still officially public land. And so the government passed a regulation that, that they could build some hotels on the, on the seaside and, next to the rivers. And because of the way our government system works, if you do a petition that's big enough, then the government has to have a referendum. So a bunch of environmentalists got together and they had to petition, and the government ran the referendum on a Sunday in July, which is, everybody goes on vacation on the Sunday in July, and still 50% of the people came out, and 87% of the people voted against this law. And so and even though they're 50-50 split when it comes to what parties they vote for, 87%. I've never seen a pie graph like that anywhere else, but it's exactly what you're saying. when you just talk about protecting the land and protecting the water, partisanship just disappears immediately.
Yeah, and I want to add that there's an amazing process called deliberative budgeting, which has been done at relatively large scales. And I remember in the United States, they did it where they, basically it's a way of getting a representative sample of people of different political backgrounds to come together and discuss how to change a budget. So they're given a sample budget, and then they go through a deliberative process where they explore what the budget means, and they're able to ask for expert advice like, well, this is the education budget, let's have an education policy expert. And then they can ask them whatever questions they want, and then they would vote to change the allocation of the budget. And what they found was that about 85% of the US population, regardless of political leaning, agreed we should cut the defense budget, we should expand healthcare and education. And it was like, the big things that everyone cares about, it's like it didn't matter what political background or party, everyone basically agreed. It was, so basically, if you stripped away propaganda and let people have a deliberative process that would correct for the propaganda, even as polarized as the US is, they all would vote the same. And so, which is exactly what Grace is saying. So this has been demonstrated in a lot of settings at scales all the way up to the US federal budget. And it's worked. So deliberative budgeting demonstrates the point, which is that with the right facilitated process, you will have healthy outcomes in governance. So now think about the right facilitated process for managing a watershed and insert Elinor Ostrom's findings here, right? Elinor Ostrom studied common pooled assets like watersheds. And it turns out that people govern common pooled assets really well. Humans are actually really good at it. And so it's interesting to say that our broken political system is probably our biggest opportunity. And I notice how I said ours, even though I'm in Colombia, we're talking about the US and Canada. Doesn't matter which nation, Grace just mentioned Slovenia. Doesn't matter which nation, they're all broken. And so it's very interesting to notice that the right deliberate processes will create completely different political systems. And the reason that they'll work is because the other systems just don't work. They're so broken. And so you don't even have to replace them, just let them crumble. And so it's very, very interesting to think in this way. And because a lot of the policymakers that are most important are at an intermediate level, like how do we determine the policy for allocating conservation funds to the fishery? The people in those positions will pretty much all be bioregionalists. They don't have the language, they don't have to call themselves bioregionalists, but they'll be the people who really are attuned to the health of those ecological systems. So that's why this is so powerful to do it right now, as the systems are so flagrantly broken. And that's without talking about what we discussed 2 weeks ago in the last design school update, which is the eco-anxiety of young people, where the only thing they're told is go to college and get a corporate job and protest on Friday afternoon. I shit you not, that's what's being given to them. You think those kids aren't going to commit suicide in droves if we don't give them an alternative? Like, they're all going to check out if we don't give them a real alternative. And understandably so. So like our two big powerhouses here are broken political systems and eco-anxiety with youth with no viable pathways to meaning. And notice that the opportunity is the brokenness, because that's the regenerative potential. And so yeah, that's kind of cool to know that we can work in that way. So I think Regenerate Cascadia is going to be very interesting because it's got a 50-year history of bioregionalism that's very strong. The history goes back longer, but it's been organizing for at least half a century. And so it's going to be very interesting to see. I remember once I was at a gathering on the Whidbey Institute on Whidbey Island, where they were bringing coal-filled train cars into Seattle. And they were like, finally, the fossil fuel companies are coming to the most organized environmental movement on earth. And you know what? They shut down the fossil fuel companies. So Cascadia is interesting. I have a feeling the Colorado Basin is similarly strong from what I've seen around the organizing around the river. it's similarly strong, and it's nowhere at all in the discourse around water rights. That is not where it's happening. It's in the kinds of things like Elizabeth doing with the building the terrace water retention systems. It's in those kinds of places, which are mostly invisible to the discourse. So, anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. No, I won't. I won't get off my soapbox. We'll keep going. But I would love to just bring us to a close today by saying that all of you are already involved in this work in various ways. And I hope that the coherence that's emerging gives you better ways to be involved, gives you better ways to organize. You know, Diana, you're there in the Ozarks. There's a lot to do in the Ozarks. Something that isn't in the design school right now, but some of our friends are doing, is organizing the Driftless region, which is another part of the Mississippi Basin up in like Iowa and Wisconsin and Minnesota. The Ogallala Aquifer also is another place that's organizing. So there's stuff that's not officially part of the design school, nor does it need to be. There's a lot of other stuff going on. Just recognizing the world's a lot bigger than what we're doing. But I hope that what we're doing will create learnings and templates and tools and processes that help all of it to happen more quickly and more effectively. And so, yeah, thank you everyone for coming to our design school update today. I'll share the recording soon so everyone can watch it and refresh if you'd like. And onward we go. So yeah, I'm looking forward to more. So yeah, onward we go, and thank you everyone.
Good to see you.